Hello friends, welcome back again. In this video, we'll talk about happiness versus pleasure. And therefore, let's start up by understanding what is happiness and pleasure. Happiness is a state of contentment, whereas pleasure is just a least part of happiness, just a small part of happiness. It is a momentary satisfaction and enjoyment. Usually, we get confused between happiness and pleasure. But what actually separates happiness and pleasure is their goal. So it's more than necessary to understand the goal of both happiness and pleasure. So as we have talked about happiness, goal is contentment. The goal for happiness is to be content, is to be satisfied. So let's take it this way. When we take it literally, when you are content, you are satisfied by what you have achieved, what you have. Pleasure on the other side, as said, it's a momentary satisfaction and enjoyment. Pleasure looks for quick gratification. So there is a huge difference between these two. The goal for happiness is to be content. So it's not just always taking. Sometimes you are happy giving, right? So that makes you satisfied. So there is a positive goal behind that. The process of happiness is hard. It takes time to achieve happiness. You need hard work. There is hardship in the process of happiness. And all bitter sides are there. It takes time to achieve the real goal of happiness. So, but when achieved, there is a complete satisfaction. Whereas on the other side, pleasure is just a small part of happiness. Pleasure looks for quick gratification. The goal for pleasure is dissatisfaction. All these guilt, regrets, dissatisfaction, all these are the goal of pleasure, because pleasure can be achieved in a moment. It does not take time. There is no hardship in pleasure. There is fun, there is enjoyment in pleasure, there is momentary satisfaction in pleasure, because the process is easy, but the goal is empty. Those are the things that separates happiness and pleasure. So to understand it even better and to go even further, let's look on some of the very important neurotransmitters that are hugely responsible when it comes to understanding of pleasure and happiness. There are two neurotransmitters very important neurotransmitters called dopamine and serotonin. The first, dopamine, is an excitatory neurotransmitter, whereas serotonin, on the other hand, is inhibitory neurotransmitter. Dopamine has a lot to do with pleasure and serotonin has a lot to do with happiness. So dopamine will let you know that something is enjoyable, something is desirable. Therefore, it makes you feel good once and therefore you need it more. Dopamine will let you know that it's enjoyable, it's funful, it's great, and therefore take it more. Then you take it more, take it more. When the level of dopamine really rises high, it drives you crazy, it makes you feel reckless, and therefore you become crazy, searching for quick gratification. On the other hand, serotonin, the other neurotransmitter, does is something that you do is good, and therefore it makes you satisfied. You are satisfied with it. Sometimes we help people, and then we are satisfied by helping somebody. Sometimes you go to church and have a good time of worship or good time of prayer, and therefore you are satisfied by what you have done. So serotonin makes you satisfied. And mind you, the increasing level of dopamine will really harm your serotonin, because the higher your dopamine level is, the lower your serotonin level becomes. So when you have very poor level of serotonin, your confidence totally drops. You are highly expected to fall into depression. You are likely to have sleepless nights. You are likely to have anxious mind. So the rising level of dopamine can really harm your level of serotonin. And the difference is this. There is addiction in dopamine because dopamine drives you crazy. When there is increasing level of dopamine, when it rises really high, then it also affects the prefrontal cortex, which is located in this part of your forehead. So when there is dysfunctional prefrontal cortex, you will not care about the consequences of your action, and therefore your only goal is to find quick gratification, is to find momentary satisfaction. And therefore pornography, games, and tobacco, taking tobaccos, drugs, alcohol, they all become really addictive. You see, as a human being, we all try to attain the state of happiness, and then in our journey towards happiness, we meet pleasure. What stops us from attaining the state of happiness is because of pleasure. But as we know that to attain happiness takes effort, it goes through hardships, it goes through a lot of difficult times, and therefore it takes time. But pleasure, it is an easy process. To achieve pleasure is so easy, and therefore we end up choosing pleasure, thinking that pleasure is something that we are looking for. That's how we choose pleasure over happiness. In the journey towards attaining happiness, we encounter pleasure, and most of us, we are unable to overcome pleasure because pleasure is attractive, because pleasure gives quick gratification, pleasure gives momentary satisfaction, and therefore we think that pleasure is something great because pleasure does not have hardships. Pleasure can be achieved easily. Unlike happiness, pleasure does not take time to achieve. Unlike happiness, there is no hardship in pleasure. But the goal of both, measure the goal of happiness and pleasure. Happiness goal is the real joy. Of course, the process for achieving happiness is hard. The process for achieving happiness is difficult, it takes time. But there is no consequences for happiness. Whereas, to attain pleasure, it's not hard, it's really easy. It does not take time, right? There is no hardship in achieving pleasure, and therefore, when we achieve that, we have big regrets. It is like the huge balloon that we find it really huge, but inside there is nothing, like just absolutely nothing. So think about it, and always know when you are trying to achieve happiness in life, there is a pleasure that we have to overcome. So once we get trapped in the pleasure, it's hard to get out of it. It is very attractive and it is addictive. So be mindful of that, and hopefully we all attain happiness in life. So thank you all for watching this video. We'll see you in the next video.